So it's going to be a very short afternoon. I'm going to speak maybe for 10-15 minutes, and then we're going to show the film, which is about another 15 minutes, and then we can have some Q&A for another maybe 15 minutes, and then we've got some food for you, which you can eat safely in non-washable plates with plastic plates, plastic spoons and forks. Disposable ones, yes, thank you. And we're also very honored to have the local media, Armenian media here as well. So, yeah, so anyway, if you do have time later on as well, please have a look at some publications. Maybe I should just say a few words about the publications. Well, first and foremost, we have copies of Armenian Voice, which we started publishing in 1987. Yeah, so the Armenian Voice was published in 1987, and so we have copies of those up to where we were publishing it in black and white. After that, we started publishing in color, which most of you have probably got. We also have something like maybe 30 albums similar to that, where we've got actually photographic pictures from our various activities and events from the sort of period when we started in late 1986. And then we also got some other publications, such as annual reports, because we used to publish annual reports, which kind of summarize our activities for the 2 years, as well as other kind of publications and reports which we contributed. This is only a sample, I have to say. Now, what I was saying was that what we have is basically a sample of the magazines and publications, and also other reports we contributed to. These are reports produced on matters such as the situation of refugee youth, on the situation of health issues of newcomers, new arrivals, migrants, immigrants, refugees, which we have contributed to. So the idea was to increase the profile of the Armenian community through our contribution to those reports and surveys. So if you get a minute, have a look at those. To do justice, actually, we need a full-time kind of 3-year project to do the real history of the center. But maybe that's another time. So, as I said, keep calm and carry on, at least 2 meters away from each other. So I'm going to basically focus on the external side of the center's history. I'm not going to go into the internal side, it's too complicated. So it's going to be the outward face, what we've been doing, and its value to the center, the value in the community. And it's going to be mainly a chronological kind of story, let's say. The center was founded in 1986, October to be precise. However, even though it was founded in October 1986, that was the time when we actually got funding, in October 1986. Prior to that, for about a year and a half, from 1985 onwards, I was lobbying the GLA at the time, when Ken Livingstone was the mayor, and he had just started supporting the cultural program of the Irish community and other communities, and we thought we'll get in there as well. And then you may remember it was also a time when there was a Conservative government which was actually closing the GLA down, and they did. So we kind of missed the boat of any funding that he was giving. But what did happen was that all 33 London boroughs got together and set up a kind of a pot of money called London Boroughs Grant Scheme, which the purpose was to support charities who are working across 2 or 3 London boroughs. So we, as a community, as an organization, our community was spread across West London mainly, so we managed to get in and apply for the London Borough Grant Scheme, and they were the first organization to fund us, which enabled us to have an office in Acton and get a couple of abstract word processors at the time. We didn't have a telephone. We had an old typewriter, even when people wanted to contact us or we wanted to help them, Diana, who was our first paid worker, she was going to the charity next door and using their telephone. So it was literally surviving from foot to mouth, so to speak. So it was very haphazard. And the very first meeting we had, I think only 2 people turned up, first public meeting. And then gradually, mainly thanks to the newsletters, people started, coming to the office to get advice. And the purpose was really to help people provide practical advice and support, because we knew that there was a lot of people who were isolated. There were, people arriving in this country without any kind of support. And we wanted to give them the opportunity to benefit whatever rights they had in this country. To further reinforce this understanding, we, through the London Borough Grant Scheme, suggested that a survey be done. And in I think it was 87, 88, but finally was published in 1990, we did a survey with an organization called the London Research Centre, which was financed by the London Borough Grant Scheme. And it involved us sending a questionnaire to about 1,500 addresses we had at the time, of which about 400 people replied. And the findings which were published, unfortunately I can't find the copy now, but I do have it. We found out that, for example, the number of Armenians who were using council services was minimum. So, for example, there was a question, do you ever use social services? And the stats came back to say 0.5. Have you ever applied to council housing? 0. Whatever. The only thing that the Armenians at the time were using was the libraries, and even that was rather minimum. There was also other questions about demography in terms of where they lived, where they were from. The demography at the time, as far as that survey was concerned, the majority were either from Iran or from Cyprus or Lebanon. There was absolutely nobody who was born in Armenia living in London at the time, according to that survey. And the other thing was that we also had some supplementary questions about, like, what would you like? Everybody kept saying, we'd like an Armenian community center, of course, and a few other conclusions. Anyway, the survey basically reinforced our understanding of our initial perception that people were dispersed, they were isolated, and they needed maybe an information center to approach for any practical advice and support. So that basically is how we started. We had about 4 members initially. Within 2 years, we had about 100. Annik, who was unfortunately couldn't come today, she was the 5th member, because I remember she writing to me at the time and saying, welcoming the idea. And we had our first kind of AGM in 87. And of course, by 1988, there was the Armenian earthquake. So a lot of the kind of groundwork that we did in the initial first 2 years was to implement the survey and to promote the center, as you'll see from the newsletters from the time. When the earthquake arrived, everything was basically put on hold, and for about 3-4 months, not just us, I think every Armenian organization, the church, Zorik will remember, everybody was basically firefighting to how we could help Armenia, and the community set up a joint committee called Aid Armenia, and we fundraised for several years. I was one of the committee members of about 15 people, which was composed of different Armenian organizations, the church. And I think by 1991 we built a hospital, thanks to all the money that was collected, which again, which we reported. I went to the opening in 91, and so that was another kind of phase. But the good thing was that because of those initial links that we'd made with the councils and whatever, I remember Ealing Council contacting me and saying, there's going to be come to the next council meeting on this day. We're going to make a decision about Armenia. And I thought, what's going on? And the nice thing was that they actually passed a motion to give the centre £5,000, that's us, the CAIA, £5,000 to help us get over the initial shock of, because we were very under-resourced. I think our first grant was maybe 8,000 or 10,000. And then they also gave another 25,000 to the general earthquake appeal. And it was similar with a few other councils. And because of our kind of initial profile, we were able to push that kind of goodwill. Obviously, the centre, once that initial, we also organised a very big event to fundraise for Aid Armenia, which was initially, which was held in Hammersmith Town Hall. About 1,000 people turned up. The hall was booked originally for the CAIA to fundraise for a building, for our own fundraising purposes, to set up a centre. But obviously, given the circumstances, we had to change the nature of that event. Even the dance group, which we had brought over, or the music band we had invited from France, which was mainly a dance group, none of the people were allowed to dance, but it was a much more solemn occasion. We had 3 local mayors, Ealing, Hounslow and Hammersmith, speaking on the day and so forth. So it was a big event, but it kind of sidetracked us from our general work. By 1988, 87, we had already started the play group. So we had the centre's office was in Acton High Street, overlooking the High Street. And then we had the play group set up in a community centre called Sourfields Community Centre in another part of Acton. And then maybe I think a year later, there was also demand for the elders to meet, and then we used a centre which was owned by Hounslow Council behind today's Sainsbury's, where they met there once on Mondays, yeah. And then a few years later, we started meeting also in Acton. On Fridays, there was a new sheltered housing building built in Crown Street, Sidney Miller Court, which is down the road, Mill Hill Road, opposite Crown Street Surgery. Nottingham Housing Trust approached us at the time and said, do you know any older Armenians who could live in sheltered building? And of course we said, yeah, because we know that they don't apply for, they have no idea what a sheltered building is. They might, and they gave us permission to house, I think, five or six people at a time, because obviously they invested and built this 42-bedroom, single-bedroom flats, and they wanted to get the rent as soon as possible. So we were ready to refer. I think it was 6 people at a time, and over the years we had the nomination rights. I think probably 15-20 people came. So in the event that somebody passed away, we were able to nominate somebody else. So we used the common hall, the common ground floor hall, common hall in that sheltered building for an elders club. So we were getting the people who were already living there, plus their friends and relatives, play bingo, have coffee, whatever. There was no food, just tea, coffee, food, no food. But again, so we were in effect in 3 places. We were in Acton High Street, we were in Southfields, and we were in this shelter building. And of course, advice was our main crucial service, because that was the gateway to, and still to this day, is still the gateway for people to come in. So whenever someone comes for advice about immigration, housing, or benefits, or finding work, we always find out that maybe they also have maybe an elderly relative, or they've got grandchildren who might benefit from the play group, and so forth. So it was a whole host of ways that we could help people, just through the fact that they came to get advice, and then we were able to direct them to the other services that we had. One of the things that was very important, and has been important subsequently, as to why, when I say why, I'll explain why, if you remind me why. was that we had to compete. I mean, fundraising is a competition. It's not given that the council or a charity trust will give you money, because you've got to appeal, you've got to explain why, what difference you're going to make, and also so basically it's in three parts. You've got to first of all get the money and explaining why you deserve it more than somebody else. Then you've got to then deliver whatever you promised, the change that you promised and the activity. And then you've got to account for it, both financially and in terms of the impact that you are making. So it's going to be measurable, whether it's the change you're bringing. And that's a kind of a continuous cycle, whether you get funding from one organization or 20, it's the same cycle of getting the funding and getting delivering and then accounting for it. In order to do that, you've also got to meet various quality standards. And over the years, we've had to meet various standards, which I'll come back to as well, because if you're running a play group, you've got to meet kind of Ofsted standards. If you're going to run advice, there are certain standards you've got to meet. And of course, as an organization, you also got to audit your accounts and be transparent, not just to the funder, but to your members, because the organization was a democratic organization. It's owned by the members, it's run by the members through the election of trustees. So I myself personally did not work for the center. I was the first chairman until 1988. I was working, and Diana was basically doing two jobs, even though she was only getting paid part-time. She was running the office, and in the mornings she was running the playgroup, because in the newspaper we announced that we need, are there any young women or people who have children, would they welcome to meet up, to give mutual support. And I think it was in July 1987 that the playgroup started meeting, and then as a summer project, and then it just continued subsequently, because everybody said, well, let's continue. We were paying a very minor rent at the time. But what was very clear was that it would be good to bring up these activities under one roof. Now, some other issues that I think is very important to recognize, which is the birth of the center was a paradigm. It was a major shift in the thinking of how organizations in this country, or maybe even elsewhere, should function, Armenian organizations should function. And the paradigm was that, the new paradigm was that we questioned the fact that to have a sustainable community, do you really need to rely on benefactors, for example? Because until then, the traditional way of running Armenian communities and organizations has been reliance on generosity of individual benefactors, and also because the history of the London Armenian community in particular is basically littered with benefactors. I mean, you've got the Gulbenkian Church, St. Sarkis, you've got, at the moment, you've got the St. Yerishe Church, owned by two private trusts. If you look up the Charity Commission website, in terms of number of trusts, you might find as many as 20 Armenian trusts. And trusts are generally closed shops. They're family run often, or run by friends, which basically perpetuate themselves with little accountability to the community. So it was a paradigm. It was a new paradigm and because it questioned how things should be done. Because if I had, for example, gone to any one person at a time and said, "Oh, give me £10,000, I want to start this, the organization called CAIA," nobody would have said goodbye. But it was also a leap in the sense that it gave us the freedom to actually do what we wanted to do, which was to actually deliver services to the community, and not to meet some personal agendas or some other ways of working. And of course, in addition to the benefactors' way of working things, is also the traditional organizations who are, often have got various other agendas, be they political or otherwise. They are also, have been preoccupied with their own self-preservation, survival in diaspora for 100 years, and therefore, they generally operated in a kind of silo mentality. While the center, actually, the way we thought, was that outside the normal church, traditional organizations, schools, whatever, there is 90% of the, let's say, 20,000 Armenian community who are not in any way engaged by Armenians, by the organizations. So that was the target demography that I was particularly interested to reach. The people who were basically either assimilated or half assimilated, or generally didn't go to church, didn't go to Armenian school, or had never had the opportunity to learn Armenian, had never had the opportunity to learn about Armenian history, or even have any contacts with Armenians for whatever reason, because they've been here for so many years, or they lived they were dispersed. So, for example, I don't want to talk about Annik, but I mean, she was a very good example as a person. I mean, she was a professional. She was a lecturer at Kingston University, but she arrived here, I don't know, I think late 50s or something, or 40s, and got married, had a professional career, had married children. But until the center she heard about the center, she was never involved in the community. And so those are the kind of people that we were attracting, which is what we set up to do. I'm starting to talk much longer than I intended to. I promise I'm going to keep it short. And also at some point, you'll be able to talk as well. Couple of other very small couple of other very small pieces of information about the demography is that the demography of the center's membership is very wide. We have an equal opportunities policy. I think we're probably the only organization, Armenian organization, who does actually have an equal opportunity policy, in the sense that we do not discriminate against anybody. Be they, I don't know, from Iran, or half Armenian, or they speak Armenian or not, or, whatever, disabled, male, female, Tashnakanchak, whatever, it doesn't matter. Which, as I said, which was again a paradigm change, because even the Armenian church, and correct me if I'm wrong here, if you're not baptized in the Armenian church, you're not considered Armenian. I could be wrong, but that's I'm correct. Yeah, and for me that was ridiculous. And it follows the conversation we had at the last lecture when we were talking about the hidden Armenians in Turkey after the genocide. We were too few. Our history does not allow us to discriminate against each other. We shouldn't. And we should open our doors to everybody, including people who may not even be Armenian, but if they think that there's a value of engaging with us, we should welcome them. And I'm so pleased that we have people in this room who've been engaging and volunteering for us, or been attending these meetings, or come to the center over the years. Because at the end of the day, we're part of a much larger community. I think that's about much I want to say about the background. There are many challenges, of course, we've faced also subsequently over the years. The biggest one was finally buying the center, which enabled us to bring everybody under one roof. The center, as you see it today, is very different from what it was when we initially purchased it. We didn't have, first of all, the money to buy it. There are some pictures of how it looked like. So, for example, this room was not like this. The black line you see on the floor was part of the courtyard, and it was L-shaped. And then 15 years ago, we made it squarer. It was a new kitchen, where a kitchen unit was built. The interior was also changed. The courtyard was reduced. There was no central heating. There was nothing. It was basically a blank building, which over the years we've adapted to meet our needs and the community's needs. The challenges have been many over the years. So as the community changed over the last 30 years, with more people coming from the former Soviet Union and elsewhere, we've also had to adapt our services. which are primarily social welfare. And by that it's mainly social and welfare to improve people's lives. What was funny was that after about 15 years of running the center, I attended this management course when I learned about Maslow's theory of hierarchy of need. And then suddenly it dawned me, by the way, that actually we've been helping people with the first 2 or 3 stages of the hierarchy. And we didn't actually preoccupy ourselves with the 4th and 5th hierarchy or the levels. Sorry if those are not familiar to the hierarchy, but it basically, very crudely, what it means is that you have to have a roof over your head, you have to have some kind of food, sustenance, you have to have some basic things in order to then get to the next level in your life, in your actualization, as it's called, the realization of your full potential. You need love, you need maybe the sustenance of your culture, you need sustenance, you need a job, you need money, and so forth, so forth. Look it up in the on the internet. And of course, we started before the internet, and we have adapted and tried to utilize the internet over the years, which again puts additional pressures and challenges to the organization. Social media in the last, I would say, 3-4 years has just gone completely haywire. One of the biggest challenges now we face as a community is about digital exclusion, which has now come into very sharp focus with this recent outbreak virus, because how can people be self-isolated and at the same time be in touch about some really vital information? And this was true even before this virus business, because about 20% of the community, I would say, if not the whole of society, is excluded. So if, for example, you couldn't speak English, now that's been compounded by the fact that you can't maybe use the internet, or you can't afford the internet, and so forth. Anyway, I'm going to stop now, unless something else comes in my mind. As I said, I apologize for the disjointed presentation. There's a lot online, there's a lot that I can say if people ask me. Let me show you the film. The film was made approximately about 1.5 years ago by Seta Grigorian, who was a fairly well-known filmmaker. She was studying in this country. She recently made a film as part of, which actually is being shown in Barbican, I think, in a couple of weeks' time, or was scheduled to be shown, about the Velvet Revolution in Armenia. And she contributed to that film. It's about Pashinyan's journey to power. Anyway, so she made it as a student here. We gave her really, peanuts to make it, and we've kept in touch. And we had to make several changes over the last year as well. It's still not perfect, I don't think, but it's good for what it is for 15 minutes. If you got thousands and thousands, you can make a much different film. So I hope you enjoy it, and once I show it, you can start asking me questions. And I really thank you again for coming on such a difficult day. In fact, this year we haven't been very lucky with the weather. We had a problem with the first 2 sessions with the whatever it was, the floods. And now we got this. Okay, who wants to turn the lights off? I moved the computer. It's okay. Just turn it off and then start again. CAIA was born to address the needs of the Armenian community in terms of its social and cultural needs. As I have been active in the community as a student for many years before the establishment of the centre. We learned from the experience of other minority communities in Britain. There were a lot of refugee communities in the 70s, 80s, who had arrived from the Middle East, from Iran, Lebanon. And of course, whenever there was a problem in the Middle East, Armenians also to a certain number arrived here as well. For those Armenians, they were not really settled, so they were physically here and they were physically working or studying, but not necessarily actually involved in any way in the society. The centre was a response to that changes. As I said, the changes were about accessing their rights as British citizens or as refugees, to help them with their settlement issues, be it on immigration or help them find work.
We provide a wide range of advice and assistance for Armenians within the London boroughs. That's annually. But our advice and assistance extends far outside the London boroughs, across England, also internationally as well. We have a lot of inquiries from Armenians in the diaspora wanting to come to England in search of a better life.
The story of the centre over the last 30 years reflects the story of what's been happening to Armenians across the world, in the sense that whatever has happened in the Middle East or in Eastern Europe or in the former Soviet Union has impacted our community here, not hugely, but even the few ripples, that ripple effect which comes to London with people arriving in this country. When we first started in 1987, there was the Armenian earthquake soon afterwards, so for 3 months we stopped our work and we just focused on working with other Armenians in the UK to help with that problem. And so we utilised whatever links we had locally within council, who for example provided a school for us, where we used as a centre to collect a lot of clothes and food to send to Armenian clients. So for 3 months we were involved with that. Later on, when there was obviously the war with Karabakh, we also were involved with that by at least raising awareness to MPs and councillors about what was happening. Because again, that had an effect, not just, as I said, by the stress it was causing the community, but also the fact that potentially there were more refugees going to arrive. We opened our offices in Acton for the first time because we realised there was a large community in West London, in Chiswick and Ealing and so forth. And over the years, by enabling Armenians to access their housing, let's say in Ealing or in Hounslow, we increased the population of the Armenian presence in those boroughs.
If we take, for example, the London borough of Ealing, that contains the highest number of Armenians. This year, our statistics record approximately 248 Armenians benefited from our service. The largest age groups who benefited from our service, that's between the ages of 25 to 44.
We are the first port of call, so we have to deal with the immediate problems that people have in terms of addressing their immediate needs. People through, helping them with accommodation, advice, helping them access their benefit rights or helping them find work.
When they get their foot in the ladder and when they're able to go about things independently, that's when I can say, well, we did our bit and the rest is over to you now. So if you teach a man how to fish, he'll feed his family for the rest of his life. But if you give a man a fish, he's going to come back here the next day. So you're not really helping him. So it's all about empowerment.
saying that, we also then organise very targeted activities. So we have youth activities, children activities, elders activities. But at the same time, we also organise intergenerational activities. Like, for example, when we organise an Easter party, we make sure that the whole family joins in. Or we have run training events here. We've organised an elders Christmas party every December for the last 30 years.
My background in education is psychology, and I work at CAIA as a health and care support worker. My role at CAIA is involved mainly with elderly and their carers. We have about over 200 clients. Initially, there is a need of building that trust, and so when I build that trust, then they feel more comfortable to open up and speak about their issues. Part of the role is involved with encouraging them to come and join the club, join the lunch club, and this obviously reduces the isolation. We encourage them to come and join mainly with elderly and their carers. We have about over 200 clients. Initially, there is a need of building that trust, and so when I build that trust, then they feel more comfortable to open up and speak about their issues. Part of the role is involved with encouraging them to come and join the club, join the lunch club, and this obviously reduces the isolation. We encourage them to come and join the events so they wouldn't feel so lonely. Otobüs ԿԵԴՐՈՆ մեզ է հետ ատանում եւ ֆրիսակի օտոբուսը։ Զբաղվում ենք։ Եթե ես չունի, ավ գործում եմ։
Misafir zerrüet ist es evaluation. İlk dünya kaçışınları bu kararları estirten olsun.
It's all about commitment. It's all about justice. It's about changing the situation from what I found myself and how others found themselves in this country.
It's really nice to have a place to get together as every Armenian, I would say. We like to keep our roots, our traditions. Speak Armenian, living in different country, we still want to keep the language. And it's nice to get together to play.
It's all about commitment. It's all about justice. It's about changing the situation from what I found myself and how others found themselves in this country.
It's really nice to have a place to get together. As every Armenian, I would say, we like to keep our roots, our traditions. Speak Armenian, living in different country, we still want to keep the language. And it's nice to get together to play with others, other children. It's also very important to keep up with other parents.
ԿԵԴՐՈՆի բացման սկզբից եղել է մանկաբարձը գործել է,
But it's also very important to keep up with other parents.
Սկզբից ԿԵԴՐՈՆի բացման սկզբից եղել է մանկաբարձը գործել է, բայց այն տարիներին ավելի ամենօրյա մանկաբարձ է եղել։ Հիմա մենք շաբաթ ուղղակի 2 օր ենք այստեղ այցելում։
Ես ունեմ 3-ը, այն երկուսն արդեն ավարտել են պարտեզը։ Հիմա էլ մեծ աղջիկս ու տղաս հաճախում են youth club-ը։
Մի քիչ 10 տարեկանից
Այդել կգանք, բայց հետո որ են չկա, ես կգամ։
Կա, ասալուսի, կանի։ Հենց էլ հայկական ոգիով դաստիարակվելու ու հայկական շունչը ամենակարևոր դերն է խաղում։ Հայաշենը միակ հայկական կենտրոնն է ամբողջ Անգլիայում, որ շատ մեծ դեր է խաղում յուրաքանչյուր հայի համար։ Ցանկացած հարցով ամեն մեկը դիմում է Հայաշեն, որը շատ կարևոր դեր է խաղում օտար երկրում։ Նման կենտրոն ունենալը իմ կարծիքով շատ մեծ դերակատարություն ունի։
The centre, as in comparison with other organisations, does not exist in a silo. It is not a ghetto organisation. It doesn't just serve its members. Okay, it's outward looking, and therefore we welcome anybody else who shares that outward looking thinking.
My name is ՏԵՂԵԿՈՒԹԵԱՆ. I'm the project coordinator at the Center of Armenian Information and Advice, and I'm working on a project called the ԿԵԴΡՈΝ on the language of ΧԱՅԿԱԿԱՆ. We are collecting oral histories, memories, testimonies of the Armenian community during ԽՈՐՀՈՒՐԴԻ. We conducted a number of oral history interviews, video interviews, old interviews, books, and a number of old magazines and archives. It's a reference library. We have both Armenian and English books, also a number of interviews, audio interviews, desk research. All information will be gathered in a website, which will be linked to British Library's special collection. An important part of the project was the research, desk research, going through books and archives, and it was very natural to start it at our wonderful library, which holds several thousand books and a number of old magazines and archives. It's a reference library. We have both Armenian and English books, also a number of books in other languages, Arabic, Turkish, French, Russian, etc. People are welcome to come use it anytime. We have lots of rare books. One of the rare books, a really beautiful old edition of Sabel Boyajan's works. She was this incredible writer and artist. She made a number of translations of Armenian old legends, and she also illustrated them.
So we need people to volunteer, we need people to really become members. I mean, we've got 400 members who every year pay £15, £20 to sustain it. But I do want to make sure that there's a role as a focal point, first and foremost, for Armenians and also for non-Armenians who want to contact the Armenian community, to make sure that the centre as an institution has the structure in place, has the people in place to continue to play a role in this community, and if it's got the resources, why not further afield as well. We got there in the end after 30 years. My family, my grandfather's life story, what took place in my lifetime, at various ages. Probably the same with everybody, And some people, as they form, they set their own personal goals, whatever it may be. Somebody wants to start their own business, somebody wants to, become rich, or somebody wants to do something. And I think most Armenians have got very good drives in terms of trying to achieve what ambitions they have. And if you work hard at something and you're dedicated, you can most likely achieve, your ambition. Pending, of course, external factors which are outside your control, which sometimes come in your way. But so it's a difficult question to go into too much detail. I mean, I don't like the fact that the film has got too much of it, frankly, because the film is about the centre, it's not me. Obviously, I've been involved heavily because I've dedicated the majority of my life to it. But I've been very lucky that there have been many, many people, far too many to mention by name, who have helped us at every stage, be they kind of individual Armenians who become members, joined, who shared the vision, board members. I'm extremely lucky to have very excellent trustees currently. They all deserve credit. The funders, obviously, who trusted us. I mean, as I said, trusted me. When you ask someone for money, which is not easy, it is an investment they're making, and I'm just pleased that the investment they made, both financially and otherwise, to this organisation, were paying off. There are many other organisations who were around when we were formed, minority ethnic communities, maybe as many as 200, and I would say maybe only about 20 have survived these last 30, 35 years. Because at some point, what happens is that the people who started get cherry-picked by another organisation, or they want to have a change in career, let's say, and they're guided by personal kind of maybe endeavours. I was never interested in personal. Well, I say personal, I mean obviously it is personal, but it's, wider. I'll give you a very simple example, which at the time when this building came available to purchase, my mother had just sold her house, and we had the money. We personally had the money to buy it. And my mother said, "Well, why don't I buy it, and then we can charge the centre £1 a year as kind of minimum rent for as long as you think." I said, "No, that's not, you know, I want this building to be owned by the community. So, you know, it's up to the community to keep it going. And I have great faith in the Armenian people. Maybe I'm stupid, but I have great faith in Armenian people. And some of the time it's paid off, because we've been through various crises over the years, and it's the members who pulled us together, who pulled us through those crises, because they actually value the centre. And some people unfortunately join the organisation for their own reasons, for their own agendas, or again, I'm not making a judgment, because people have got different motives, and that's normal in a way. Someone joins the organisation, let's say, to whether they're as a committee member, or as a staff even, or as a volunteer, you know, it's fine. That's one of the missions of the centre, to help somebody progress. Because that's something I actually realised about 15, 20 years ago, that if somebody joins for purely personal reasons, let's say to further their career, in a way that's fine, because they can come here, they can learn, they can get a work experience and get a better job. It's great, you know. I don't feel bad about that. In fact, I feel proud that if somebody comes here, let's say, who knows nothing, and gains work experience, and then is able to move on to a better paid job or better career, as many have done, that's fine. Similarly, just for information, this organization is also given as a value, has been also valued with very many other Armenian organizations. So, for example, a lot of the parents who used to come to the playgroup back in, you know, when we started, over the decades, they've all gone to serve in both this Armenian Sunday school and Saturday school as part of their parents' committees. So they actually learn something here in terms of how they should act together, and they continue to serve in other capacity. Or let's say some of our early trustees were people who then set up other organizations. So for example, you may not know that Susan Patty was one of our first trustees. She subsequently went and formed the Armenian Institute, which is great. In fact, you know, and there's many more examples I can give you. Another member of ours who served on our committee for about 3-4 years is now the chairman of the St. Sarkis Armenian Church, Stephen Moradian, for example. So these are people who are not normally in the community, but over the years, by coming to the centre, they've gone to do other things for the community, as trustees of other organizations, or as volunteers, or even in their personal capacity. So that's something that's not often recognized, that there is an additional kind of value to the centre in terms of helping develop the community, which is not necessarily service-based. Because a lot of people come here to get a service, because that's really its ultimately aim. You know, we provide a service, and we should be always mindful of the quality of the service. That's why I'm really embarrassed about the film, because the quality clearly was not sufficient. And whether it's the upkeep of the building, or whether it's the quality of the advice, or the qualifications that our staff have, we must always strive to always improve the quality. Because don't forget, we are competing not with just Armenians, we're competing with a wider quality of services. So if you go to one hotel and you go to another hotel and you compare the two, you make a judgment as to which one you think is better in terms of its cleanliness, whether it's customer care, whether you will go back again. So the same mindset has to apply for Armenians as well. That the quality of your service has got to be as good as whatever is out there in society. Same if you open a restaurant, it's the same. You know, you open a restaurant, you're competing with other restaurants. Therefore, yours has got to strive to be just as good as any others. Sorry if I answered the question. In a roundabout way.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, please.
How did you get the funding for this? That must have been quite a job.
The funding for this, we didn't have the funding for this. What we did was, in the first 5 years of the centre, from 97 to 93, we were putting about £5,000 aside for such a building project, and we had about £50,000, or 45, I think, 45. And when this building became available, it was empty for about several years. and it was in the mid-90s. Do you remember what was it, that bank? It was an Indian bank which went bankrupt. BSI? Whatever, yeah. And it was just about to go on the market, and then one of our members said, this is going to go on market. Get the person in, the estate agent in, to talk to us. And so he came and we said to him, look, we can only afford 155,000. And I said, we don't have that. We'll give you a third now, and there's a third in 6 months' time. So we spent the following 6 months basically fundraising the remaining 100,000 by bringing potential funders in. Again, these were trusts that we had developed a relationship with without necessarily asking money for before, because fundraising is also about relationships. You've got to make sure that that those people are, you have to ask when the situation is right. And so one funder who came and saw it basically said, we'll give you 50,000. And then we managed to get another 10, another 5, another whatever from different bodies. I think their names are on this wall, just behind this column wall. There's a list of charities. And of course the community and members gave as well. But then we spent another 50,000 on top of that for about 6 months doing it up, because there was nothing here.